Hi folks, it's Professor Koenig and I am with you to talk about introducing communication theory, and specifically we are moving into organizational communication, which you can study all on your own and take a complete track in organizational communication, become an expert at it. So we're just kind of touching on a few of the more prominent theories in organizational communication. And the first one is in chapter 14, and that's groupthink. And prior to getting into this, I want to make sure that we know what organizational communication is, right? So you're thinking about now groups, you're thinking about organizations, so your job, your university, that's an organization, groups that you're in, so informal groups might be your book club, right? That's a group that you might be in that's sort of informal. Formal groups, so sororities, fraternities, these are formal groups. They have rules and bylaws and things like that. So there's a lot of different organizations and groups that each one of us is a part of, even if we don't realize it. And really informal groups could even be your family, but we think about those a little bit more in the relational communication theories. But too, it's important to know that just because you're a part of a job or a career or an organization or an institution doesn't mean that those relationships don't happen, many in the same way that happen with your family and friends. But an organization itself is like this entity. And so there's different rules that take place within these specific entities. And some of these rules are dictated by the powers that be, and some of these rules are just they sort of develop and evolve. And one of those is groupthink. So this is chapter 14 specifically. And groupthink is, it's like I think it's a pretty straightforward, but it's psychologically, it's sort of like hard to wrap your head around how something like this can happen or does happen, although when it does, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, this is a time-tested theory. So when I say that, I mean that it happens a lot. It happens in everyday groups, but it happens on big societal levels as well. So basically, at a glance, groupthink is when highly cohesive groups frequently fail to consider alternatives to their course of action. When group members think similarly and do not entertain contrary views, they are also unlikely to share unpopular or dissimilar ideas with others. Groupthink suggests that members come to decisions prematurely. So cohesion in a group is important. That's something to note. That a group needs some level of agreement, right? Think about the jobs that you have in life or have had, or the groups that you've been a part of. You have to kind of like the other people, right? If you go to work every day and you hate everybody that you work with, it's really hard to get anything done. And companies don't want that. Organizations don't want that. They want to encourage group members to get along. And think of some of the ways that they do that, right? So you have lunches that they sponsor, or some, depending on what kind of industry you work at, there's happy hours. Everybody at work get together for a happy hour. And why? So we get along, so we get to know each other, so that when we're at work, we work together. So cohesion is a nice thing at your jobs, your organizations. But what happens when there's too much cohesion? That can lead to this idea of groupthink. And groupthink is a way of deliberating that group members desire unanimity, and that unanimity overrides their motivation to assess all available plans. So we'd rather all get along than argue with each other. And argue is not a bad thing, right? Because argument leads to better decision making. Argument leads to debate, healthy debate. But with groupthink, we don't want to do that. We'd rather just all be in coordination with each other. We'd all just rather agree with each other. Nobody wants to be the outlier. And so we just all kind of go along with each other. And on some levels, maybe we all agree with each other and we all get it. And we're all on the same page, and that could be a good thing. But then there's this sort of like mentality of being a part of this group. And what happens when you don't agree? What do? Do you say anything? Do you feel like you can say something? So groupthink is potentially dangerous when group members don't feel like they can weigh out the alternatives, or when they should weigh out the alternatives. Rather, they feel like there's some sort of like group pressure to get along or to agree or to not speak out or to not speak up. And what are the potential hazards of this? Well, some of the examples that the book offers you are real, like, historical examples. I think, and one that is not really mentioned in the book, but something that you might consider that's a really famous example is Nazi Germany. So what happened in Nazi Germany? Are we to believe that every single one of the Nazis involved in murdering, I'm going to use an extreme word, murdering other people, were okay with it? No, of course not. There were definitely people who stopped themselves, probably on a daily or hourly basis, and said, should we be doing this? Is this a good idea? Like, I don't know if I feel good about rounding up these people and putting them in death camps. But everybody else seems to think this is a good idea. And so, what am I going to say something? Like, I should not. I mean, it must be a good idea, right? I mean, if everybody thinks it's a good idea, my version of thinking it's a bad idea must not be correct. I'm not analyzing things correctly. This must all be, the plan must be good, right? That's pretty dangerous. And that is a really like a famous historical example of the potential dangers of too much cohesion, of people thinking along the same lines. There's some factors, so some antecedents. This is what comes before. So some of the conditions. So again, we have this cohesion, say, within a group. We're getting along, we all agree with each other. There's structural factors. So it's noted that specific structural characteristics are antecedents, this is leading to, or faults that promote groupthink. They include insulation of the group. So what do I mean by insulation? Well, we're not really affected by outside influences, right? We're kind of in, like, think about like a kind of a cocoon. We're all sort of in this like bubble living together, and we don't really see the outside world very much. And I think Nazi Germany is a really good example of what that could be, right? Lack of impartial leadership. So groups led by individuals who put their personal agendas first. So who was in charge of Nazi Germany and what was his agenda? Well, he had a very specific one. Was it impartial? No. He wasn't looking around saying, oh yeah, maybe like this group's not so bad, so let's not kill this group. No, he was pretty straightforward on what he wanted to do and wasn't looking to alternatives. Lack of clear procedures or decisions, so failing to provide norms for solving group issues. So rather than having like a procedures, like if you don't agree with this, then you can write in a letter, or there's like whistleblowers, right? Have you heard that term of whistleblowing? We have laws in this country that if you don't agree with your boss, or you don't agree, you think there's something very unethical going along in your organization or your company, and we think about this like on governmental levels or big organizations, you are legally allowed to tell on them, and you should not get fired for that. That's called the whistleblower law. So why do those laws happen? Because of things like this, because of things like groupthink. Because if we're all just kind of in it, we all are sort of following this leader and we're following his personal sort of agenda, and we don't feel like there's like these rules in place that allow for us to speak our mind, who's going to speak up? Why would you speak up, right? Also, fourth, let me find where I was. homogeneity of the group member's background. So Nazi Germany is an example of homogeneity. So what's that? Everybody was German who agreed with this, right? And if you weren't, that's when you started to get singled out. So there's symptoms of groupthink, right? So you start to think that the group is perfect, that the group is right. So this like overestimation of the group, this illusion of invulnerability. So in Nazi Germany, like Hitler went out there and he was like, we're gonna go fight this country, we're gonna go fight this country, we're gonna take this. We're awesome. We can do that. We're gonna have no problems doing that. We are great. And everybody went along with it. Hey, well, he said, yeah, so we are great, right? We're a proud, strong nation. We can go take over this other country. Sure, why not? So there's like this illusion of being invulnerable. Belief in the inherent morality. Assumption that the group members are thoughtful and good. So again, I said that I'm sure there were people in Nazi Germany who acted on some of these horrible, horrific actions and said, this is bad. But for the most part, a lot of these people thought this was a good idea, right? They were led to believe that this was a good idea, that this was going to help save their country. Close-mindedness, right? So willingness to ignore differences in people. So I think I'm right. I hear people saying things like, oh, they're killing millions of Jews. I hear that, and I'm like, no, that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on at all. Actually, we're putting them in these camps and we're doing experiments on them because it's going to be a good thing for Germany, right? I mean, I don't want to become very political, but I think that there are some examples that we can see in our current climate, right? Our current political climate of this closed-mindedness on both sides of the spectrum. I'm not picking one side or the other, where we live in sort of these social media bubbles and we say, that's all fake news over there, that way. Or I live in this bubble, I say, that's all fake news over there, that way. And I don't open my mind to say, let me read the other side, see what the other side is saying. Or let me see why these people in this area of America are so upset with the way the country is going. What is going on here? Rather, I say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. Right? I think that we can see a lot of that going on. And that leads to out-group stereotypes, right? That also leads to like this collective rationalization. Well, if we all think it's good, then we can all rationalize it. So if enough people think that killing Jewish people and I mean, there was tons of groups that were being killed. I don't want to say that it was just Jews in Nazi Germany, but it stands out to me right now. But if enough people are rationalizing this, can I start to rationalize it? How can that many people be wrong? How can that many of my friends and families and the people that I consider like, you know, fellow Germans, if they all think and they can rationalize killing all these millions of people, why can't I? Right? So all of a sudden, I hope that you see that this theory is saying that we get to this place where it's like we're all just going along with it. And that's dangerous. So my example of Nazi Germany is on a big, huge scale, but think about a small scale. Think about maybe some groups that you've been in where everybody just sort of goes along with it. Nobody says anything. And then in the end, man, we should have debated this. We should have said something. We should have thought along different lines, perhaps, or opened the door to thinking differently. That's what groupthink basically says. So think before you act. Some of the ways to prevent groupthink and say, am I just going along with this because everybody else is going along with this? Is this really a good idea? Or am I just trying to keep the group oriented towards each other? I've rambled for a while, even though this is a very short chapter. You wouldn't think so by this video. I hope this helped you and made sense to you. Always feel free to email me.